Rain lashed against the glass walls of the penthouse, drumming a relentless rhythm that matched the pounding of Elena Carter's heart. Midnight had swallowed the city in silver and shadow, its streets slick and glistening far below. But inside Adrian Blake's world of marble and glass, the storm was far more violent. It was in his eyes, cold, accusing, and utterly unfamiliar. Elena stood in the middle of the living room, her fingers trembling around the sonogram photo she had brought to show him, the one she had imagined they would celebrate together. She had pictured him smiling, lifting her into his arms, whispering promises of a future built together. Instead, he stared at her as though she were a stranger who had just broken into his life. "This baby isn't mine." The words exploded from his chest like a bullet, and she swore she felt them tear through her body. Her breath caught. "Adrian, what are you talking about?" He laughed, a short, sharp, bitter sound that didn't belong to the man she loved. "Don't play innocent with me, Elena. You think I'm blind? You think I don't see what this is? You, pregnant, out of nowhere, trying to trap me, trying to dig your claws into my money, my name, my company." Her knees weakened, and she clutched the back of a chair for support. "Trap you? Adrian, we talked about starting a family. We dreamed about it. I love you. I thought—" "You thought wrong," he spat, cutting her off. "I thought I was marrying someone honest, someone who didn't see me as a bank account. But now I see it for what it is. You probably don't even know who the father is." The tears that had been threatening finally fell, hot and uncontrollable. "How can you say that? I have never been with anyone but you." But he wasn't listening. Pride roared louder than truth, and jealousy poisoned every corner of his mind. His words grew sharper, vicious, slicing through her defenses. "I've built everything I have from nothing. Do you really think I'd throw it all away for a liar? I should have known. Girls like you, teachers from nowhere. You see a man like me and smell opportunity." Something inside Elena cracked. Not just her heart, deeper. Something that had believed in forever. She looked at him through the blur of her tears and saw not the man who had kissed her forehead goodnight, not the man who had held her hand through sleepless nights and promised her a future, but a stranger wearing his face. "Adrian," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I love you. I didn't plan this. I wanted this baby because I wanted us. Please, don't do this." For a fleeting moment, something flickered behind his eyes. Doubt, maybe. But pride crushed it before it could breathe. He turned away, his voice ice. "Get out." She froze. "What?" "You heard me. I don't want to see you again. Take your lies and go." The words were colder than the storm raging outside, but he didn't hesitate. He grabbed her coat from the hook, shoved it into her hands, and opened the door. The rain beyond roared like an angry ocean. "Elena, this ends now," he said, without a tremor of regret, and then he slammed the door. The night swallowed her whole. Rain soaked her instantly, plastering her hair to her skin, chilling her to the bone. She stumbled down the steps barefoot, the sonogram photo still clutched in her shaking hands. The city lights blurred through her tears, neon smears of heartbreak. She walked because she didn't know what else to do, each step heavier than the last, each breath a battle. Her body, already fragile from the pregnancy, gave way. Her legs buckled and she collapsed onto the wet pavement, the cold seeping through her bones. The world tilted, sounds fading, her heartbeat slowing to a frightened rhythm somewhere in the haze. A voice was calling her name, not Adrian's, softer, warmer. Hey, I've got you," the voice said, close now, steady hands lifting her from the ground, strong arms wrapped around her trembling body, shielding her from the rain. "You're safe now," the stranger whispered, and for the first time that night, Elena let herself believe it. Then everything went black. The world returned to Elena in fragments of sound and light. At first there was only warmth, the faint smell of coffee and rain, and the steady rhythm of someone's heartbeat beneath her cheek. When her eyes fluttered open, she was no longer lying on the cold street, but in a softly lit room with faded walls and the hum of an old heater. A thin blanket covered her, and on the chair beside the bed sat the stranger who had carried her out of the storm. He wasn't dressed like anyone she knew from Adrian's world. No tailored suits or expensive watches. Just a plain sweater, rolled-up sleeves, and eyes that held a kind of gentle concern she hadn't seen in months. "You're awake," he said softly, setting down the mug in his hand. "I was starting to worry." Her throat felt raw when she spoke. "Where am I?" "My place," he replied. "You collapsed outside a bookstore about 2 blocks from here. I didn't know who to call, so I brought you here. I'm Daniel." The name hung in the air as she tried to piece together how her life had unraveled so completely in one night. Daniel, a stranger who had found her broken and unconscious, who had chosen to help when the man she loved had thrown her away. "You're safe," he added, sensing the panic that flickered in her eyes. "I called a doctor friend of mine. He checked on you and the baby. You're both okay." The word baby sent a shiver through her. It felt foreign now, tainted by Adrian's words. But then Daniel smiled. Not the polished smile of a billionaire trying to impress, but something real, almost grounding. "I made some soup," he said. "It's nothing fancy, but it might help." She nodded silently, letting the warmth of the room soak into her bones. Everything felt fragile, the life inside her, her sense of self, her future. All of it hung in the balance, and yet this stranger treated her as if she wasn't a burden, but someone worth saving. Over the next few days, the rain outside continued, and so did Daniel's quiet care. He didn't pry into her past, didn't ask why a pregnant woman was wandering the streets alone at midnight. He simply offered kindness in small, thoughtful ways. Fresh tea in the mornings, books left by her bedside, long walks down quiet hallways when she couldn't sleep. And though Elena barely spoke, a strange sense of safety began to grow around him. But the silence was heavier inside her than the storm outside. She woke in the night with Adrian's voice echoing in her mind, accusing, cruel, unforgettable. Sometimes she touched her stomach and whispered apologies to the child growing there, as if she had already failed before even beginning. One evening, Daniel found her on the small balcony, staring out at the city lights below. "Whoever he is," Daniel said quietly from behind her, "he doesn't deserve the tears you're wasting." She turned, startled. "How do you know?" "Because men who love you don't abandon you in the rain," he said simply. "And they definitely don't walk away from their own child." Something inside her cracked again, but this time it wasn't from pain. It was from the weight of someone finally saying what she had been too afraid to admit. She wanted to believe it. She wanted to believe that what Adrian had done was about him, not her worth. Days turned into weeks, and slowly she began to smile again. Daniel made her laugh with stories about the kids at the community center where he volunteered. He walked with her to her doctor appointments and talked to the baby as if it were already part of his world. And in those moments, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. But the past has a way of finding you even when you try to hide. One afternoon, as she walked home from the clinic with Daniel, a sleek black car stopped at the curb. The tinted window rolled down, and her heart froze. Adrian was sitting inside, his face pale and his eyes locked on her growing belly. "Elena," he said, voice shaking with something between desperation and fear. "We need to talk." The street suddenly felt too small, the air too thin. Daniel stepped slightly closer, his presence like a shield. "You have no right," Elena whispered, though her voice trembled. But Adrian's gaze never left her. "I need to know the truth," he said, his tone breaking. "I need to know if that baby is mine." Her heartbeat roared in her ears as the world tilted around her. For the first time since that night, she saw not arrogance in his eyes, but something far more dangerous. Regret. And beneath that regret, a flicker of determination that told her this was far from over. As the car idled and the rain began again, Elena realized her past and present were about to collide in ways she wasn't ready for, and the choice she made next would change not only her life, but the future of the child she carried. The wind outside Daniel's apartment howled like an unspoken warning the night Adrian reappeared in Elena's life. She had thought she was stronger now, thought that weeks of quiet mornings and gentle conversations had patched together the shattered pieces of her heart. But one look into Adrian's eyes, one trembling question about the child she carried, and every wound she had tried to forget began to ache again. For days after the encounter on the street, Elena couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. There were cars idling too long near the shelter where Daniel worked, unfamiliar faces turning away when she met their eyes. Adrian had money, power, influence. If he wanted an swears he would find a way to get them. Yet what unsettled her most wasn't the fear of his presence, but the confusion it stirred inside her. Somewhere beneath all the pain and betrayal, a part of her still remembered the man who had once promised forever. Daniel noticed the shift in her almost immediately. The laughter that had started to bloom in her was gone again. Her smiles became rarer, her words more distant. One evening, as they shared a quiet dinner, he set down his fork and studied her face. "He's still inside your head, isn't he?" Daniel asked gently. She stared at her plate, unable to lie. "I don't know how to make him leave." "You don't have to forget him to move forward," Daniel said. "But you do have to decide if the man you loved still exists, or if he disappeared the night he left you in the rain." The words lingered long after he said them. That night, Elena dreamed of the life she and Adrian had once planned, the home with a garden, the laughter of children, the shared dreams. And when she woke, those memories were ghosts, haunting her with what might have been. A week later, the past became flesh and blood again. She was leaving a prenatal appointment when a man in a dark suit approached her. "Miss Carter," he said politely, "Mr. Blake would like to speak with you. He's waiting across the street." Her first instinct was to run, but curiosity, guilt, and something deeper rooted her to the spot. Against her better judgment, she crossed the street and found Adrian waiting by a bench beneath the shade of an old oak tree. He looked different, thinner, wearier, his usual arrogance dulled by sleepless nights. "I know I have no right," he began before she could speak, "but I can't live without knowing the truth. If the baby is mine, I want to be part of its life." Elena's pulse quickened. "And if it's not?" "Then I'll walk away and never bother you again," he said, voice barely a whisper. "But if it is mine, please let me make things right." The sincerity in his eyes unsettled her. Could it be real, or was it just another performance from a man who was used to getting what he wanted? "Why now?" she asked. "Why not when I needed you most?" Adrian's shoulders sagged. "Because I was a coward, because I let fear speak louder than love, and because losing you showed me that nothing I've built matters without you." The words she had once dreamed of hearing now felt like daggers. She turned to leave, but he reached into his pocket and handed her an envelope. "Inside is the contact for a lawyer. I'm requesting a paternity test. Not to hurt you, not to take anything from you, but because I need to know if I'm already a father." Elena took the envelope, but said nothing. That night, she sat on the couch staring at it for hours, her heart torn between two worlds. The one that had betrayed her, and the one that had saved her. Daniel found her there, frozen in indecision. "You don't owe him anything," Daniel said softly. "But you do owe your child the truth." Her voice shook when she answered. "What if the truth changes everything?" "Then let it," he replied. "If he's the father, he'll have to face what that means. And if he isn't, he'll have to live with the consequences of what he lost." 2 days later, Elena agreed to the test. The clinic visit was clinical and cold, but beneath the sterile walls and clipped instructions was a storm of emotion. Adrian tried to make conversation, but she kept her gaze fixed on the floor. When it was over, he walked her to the door and said quietly, "No matter what the results say, I will never forgive myself for that night." The results would take 2 weeks. 2 weeks of waiting. 2 weeks of wondering if the man who had broken her heart would forever be tied to her future. But deep down, Elena knew something far more complicated was growing. Not just the baby inside her, but a dangerous question she could no longer ignore. If the child was Adrian's, could she ever forgive him enough to let him in? And if it wasn't, what would that mean for the man who had shown her what love could truly be? The answers were coming, and with them, a truth powerful enough to change all their lives forever. The waiting felt like a lifetime. Every sunrise brought Elena closer to an answer she wasn't sure she wanted, and every sunset left her with more questions than before. 2 weeks stretched into a heavy silence that clung to everything. The walls of Daniel's apartment, the way he spoke to her, the way she held her stomach when she thought no one was watching. Life continued around her, but her heart was trapped in the space between the past and the future. Daniel tried to be her anchor. He cooked, he read to the baby. He even painted the nursery walls a soft shade of green one afternoon while humming quietly to himself. But no matter how hard he tried to keep the air light, he could see the storm building behind Elena's eyes. And though he never said it, he feared what the results might mean for the fragile bond they had built. One evening, the phone rang. Elena's hands shook as she answered. It was the clinic. The results were ready. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, detached, a tone that felt painfully at odds with the chaos in her chest. The test confirms a 99.9% probability of paternity, the woman said. Adrian Blake is the biological father. The room seemed to tilt. It wasn't a surprise. Deep down, she had always known. But hearing it spoken aloud made everything real in a way it hadn't been before. She hung up and sat in silence, staring at nothing. The world had shifted beneath her feet, and there was no going back. Daniel entered the room quietly, his expression unreadable. It's his, isn't it? She nodded. It is. For a moment, neither spoke. The truth hung between them, heavy and suffocating. Then Daniel sighed and sat beside her. That doesn't change anything for me, he said. I love you. And I already love this child. But Elena wasn't sure if love alone could fight the gravity of what had been set in motion. Adrian now had a legal claim. He had power, influence, money, and a growing desperation to fix his mistakes. And as she soon learned, he was prepared to use every bit of that power to re-enter her life. The next morning, a formal letter arrived from Adrian's attorney. It wasn't a threat, but it wasn't a request either. He wanted visitation rights, shared custody discussions, and a meeting to determine the best path forward for the child. It felt cold, calculated. A business negotiation rather than a plea from a father. Yet beneath the polished legal language was a deeper message. Adrian wasn't going to disappear. Daniel read the letter quietly and handed it back. If you want me to fight this with you, I will, he said. But you need to decide what's right, not just for you, but for the baby. Elena's heart was a battlefield. Part of her wanted to slam the door on Adrian forever, to raise the baby in peace with Daniel's steady love and kindness. But another part, a part she hated, wondered if her child deserved to know its biological father, even if that man had once left them in the rain. A week later, she agreed to meet Adrian. They sat across from each other in a quiet cafe, a table between them but a canyon of betrayal and regret separating their souls. Adrian looked different this time, less like a man in control, more like someone who had been stripped of everything he once believed in. I know I have no right to ask for anything, he said, his voice barely steady. But I'm asking anyway. Please, let me be part of our child's life. Our child, she repeated, the words tasting bitter and strange. You didn't want this child. You called it a trap. You threw me out. I was terrified, he confessed. I thought you'd betray me like everyone else has. I let my fear destroy the best thing that ever happened to me, and I've regretted it every day since. Elena's breath hitched. She had dreamed of hearing those words once, but now that they were here, they felt hollow. "Regret doesn't undo what you did," she said quietly. "It doesn't erase the nights I cried myself to sleep. It doesn't erase the fact that someone else picked me up off the ground when you left me there." Adrian's jaw tightened. "I can't change the past, but I can fight for the future." And fight he did. Over the next few weeks, Adrian made himself impossible to ignore. He sent gifts, books for the baby, medical supplies, letters that spoke of guilt and hope. He showed up at every doctor's appointment, sitting quietly in the corner, trying to prove that he was ready to change. And every time Elena saw him, the wall she had built cracked just a little more. But with each crack came a deeper fear. What if letting Adrian in meant losing Daniel? What if the man who had saved her heart was pushed aside by the man who had broken it? And most terrifying of all, what if her own heart betrayed her and still wanted the man who had once left her in the rain? The answers remained hidden, but one thing was clear. The calm that had sheltered her was gone. A storm was coming again, one far more complicated and dangerous than before. And this time, it wouldn't just decide the fate of her heart, it would decide the future of her child. The storm she had feared finally arrived, and it came not with thunder or lightning, but with a single letter delivered to Daniel's doorstep on a gray morning. The envelope was heavy, embossed with the name of a powerful law firm. Inside, the message was short and merciless. Adrian Blake was filing for partial custody of the unborn child. It wasn't a request now. It was a battle cry. Elena stared at the document as if it might vanish if she refused to read it. The words blurred together. Petition, rights, parental involvement, all cold and sterile. But beneath the legal jargon, she heard the real message. Adrian was determined to reclaim what he had thrown away, even if it meant dragging her through the fire to do it. Daniel read the papers silently, his jaw tightening with every line. "He's not doing this for the child," he said finally. "He's doing it because he can't stand the idea of not owning what he once had." But Elena wasn't sure. Over the past weeks, she had seen a different side of Adrian. He had shown up to every appointment, sent handwritten letters apologizing for his cruelty, even spoken gently to the baby through her belly when she allowed him near. It was confusing, infuriatingly so. Was this sincerity or manipulation? A desperate father's attempt to make things right, or a billionaire's refusal to lose control? The court date was set for a month before her due date. The tension that followed was unbearable. Every conversation with Adrian turned into a subtle war of words. He spoke about shared responsibilities, about co-parenting, about doing the right thing, but his eyes burned with a stubbornness that frightened her. Daniel, on the other hand, grew quieter, more withdrawn. He never asked her to choose, but she could feel the weight of his unspoken fear, that this child might tie her to a man she no longer loved but could never escape. One night, as rain beat against the windows, Daniel finally broke the silence. "If he wins even partial custody," he said, "he'll be in your life forever. And not just yours, mine too. Are you ready for that?" Elena wrapped her arms around herself, staring into the darkness. "I don't know what I'm ready for anymore." "Then decide what you're fighting for," Daniel said. "Because once this starts, there's no turning back." The day of the hearing arrived with a chill in the air. The courtroom was filled with reporters, lawyers, and curious onlookers eager for a scandal involving one of the city's most powerful men. Adrian's legal team was sharp and ruthless, painting him as a remorseful father desperate to be part of his child's life. Elena's attorney countered with the truth. The night he had thrown her out, the months of silence, the emotional damage he had caused. Then came Adrian's turn to speak. He stood, eyes fixed on Elena, voice trembling with carefully measured regret. "I made mistakes," he said. "Terrible ones. But I have spent every day since trying to make them right. I don't want to take our child from you. I just want to be there. I want to watch them grow, teach them, protect them. And if you let me, I want to make sure they know I never stopped loving them, Or you. The courtroom murmured. Even Elena's attorney shifted uncomfortably. It was a performance, but it was also painfully convincing. And for the first time, Elena saw something in Adrian's eyes that wasn't arrogance or control. It was vulnerability. When it was her turn, she rose slowly, her voice steady but thick with emotion. This isn't about revenge. This isn't about punishing him. This is about what's best for my child. And I don't believe someone who could abandon their family in the rain should be allowed to decide what's best for them now. The judge recessed for deliberation, but Elena knew this was far from over. That night, she couldn't sleep. Adrian's words replayed over and over, twisting through her mind. Could someone who had broken her so deeply truly change? And if he could, did she have the right to deny her child a father who was trying to make amends? 2 weeks later, a preliminary decision arrived. Adrian would be granted visitation rights after the baby was born, pending a review of his involvement and behavior. It wasn't the victory he wanted, but it was a door left open, one that would be impossible to close once it was there. Daniel said little when he heard the news. He simply nodded and went back to painting the nursery, the brushstrokes slower than usual. But that night, as Elena lay awake, she heard him whisper softly into the darkness, "I'll fight for both of you, even if I lose." It was in that moment that Elena realized this fight was no longer about custody or courtroom victories. It was about the two men who now stood at the edges of her life. One who had broken her and now sought redemption, and one who had saved her and now feared losing her. And as the day of the baby's arrival crept closer, she knew that no matter what the judge decided, the true battle was just beginning. Because soon, the baby would arrive, and with it, the question that could destroy everything. Who would she choose to stand beside her when that first cry echoed into the world? The weeks leading up to the baby's birth felt like walking through a minefield. Every step Elena took was heavy with choices she wasn't ready to make. Every glance from Daniel carried unspoken questions, and every message from Adrian carried promises she didn't trust. The world around her was spinning faster than she could breathe, and at the center of it all was a tiny heartbeat growing stronger inside her. A heartbeat that would soon demand answers no court could decide. Public curiosity had exploded since the custody hearing. News outlets called it a modern tragedy. Tabloids speculated about love triangles and billion-dollar battles, and everywhere Elena went, someone seemed to be watching. But the media attention was nothing compared to the storm brewing behind closed doors. Adrian was determined to prove he could change, showing up with baby supplies, parenting books, even volunteering at prenatal classes. Yet no matter how polished his apologies were, Elena couldn't forget the night he left her on the street. Daniel, Mia, and Weil had grown quieter but more present. He didn't try to compete with Adrian's grand gestures. Instead, he held Elena's hand during sleepless nights, built a crib with his own hands, and spoke to the baby with stories of love and hope. But beneath his calm exterior, a silent fear was taking root. The fear that when the moment came, Elena's heart might choose blood over loyalty. One rainy afternoon, a knock on the door shattered the uneasy peace. It wasn't Adrian, it was his lawyer, holding a new document, a proposed agreement. If Elena would allow Adrian to have joint custody from birth, he would drop all further legal action and set up a trust fund worth tens of millions for the child's future. It was a tempting offer, one that could guarantee security for life. But it came with a cost. It meant Adrian would be in their lives forever, not as a visitor, but as an equal parent. Daniel read the papers silently before handing them back. "This isn't about the baby," he said. "It's about control. He wants to write himself back into a story he once burned to the ground." Elena didn't respond. Her mind was spinning. Was she being stubborn by holding on to her anger? Was denying Adrian more than visitation punishing her child for something they didn't do? And what if he truly had changed? The doubt was suffocating. 2 nights later, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, the first contraction hit. It was sharp and sudden, pulling her breath from her chest. Then another, and another. Panic and pain tangled together as Daniel rushed to her side, his voice steady and calm as he called for help. But fate had a cruel sense of timing, because when the ambulance arrived, Adrian was already waiting outside the building. He had been following her appointments, watching the dates, preparing for this very moment. At the hospital, chaos swirled around her. Doctors rushed it. In and out, nurses called for equipment, and Daniel held her hand through every wave of agony. Then, in a moment that felt both cruel and inevitable, Adrian walked into the room. His face was pale, his eyes wide with fear. He didn't speak. He simply took her other hand and whispered, "I'm here. I'm not leaving this time." Hours felt like days, and every scream carried years of heartbreak. But when it was over, when the room was filled with the piercing cry of new life, the world seemed to stand still. The baby, her baby, was here. Small, perfect, and impossibly beautiful. Tears streamed down Elena's face as the nurse placed the tiny bundle in her arms. Daniel leaned close, his voice breaking. "You did it. He's perfect." Adrian stood a few steps back, frozen, his hands shaking. Can I see him?" he asked softly. Elena hesitated before nodding. Adrian approached slowly, almost afraid to touch the child he had once denied. When his finger brushed the baby's hand and those tiny fingers curled around his own, something inside him shattered. He sank into the chair beside her, silent tears streaking down his face. "I was wrong," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I was so wrong." The room was heavy with emotion, but beneath it all was an undercurrent of danger. Because now that the baby had arrived, everything was about to change. Adrian's legal claim would grow stronger. Daniel's place beside them would grow more uncertain. And Elena's heart, torn between the man who had broken her and the one who had saved her, would have to choose. Not for herself, but for the tiny soul sleeping in her arms. But just as the room began to settle, a nurse returned with an envelope. "A routine document from the hospital," she said. Inside was something that made Elena's hands go cold. A preliminary registration listed Adrian Blake as the legal father of the child. No signature from her, no consent, no explanation. The battle she thought was ending had only just begun. And this time, it wasn't about love, regret, or forgiveness. It was about who had the right to call this child their own. The first days after the baby's birth were supposed to be filled with peace and soft lullabies, but instead they were consumed by chaos and unanswered questions. Elena barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, the image of that hospital form haunted her. The document that named Adrian Blake as the legal father without her signature, without her consent. It was more than a mistake. It was a move, a calculated one. And it told her something chilling. Adrian had no intention of letting go. Daniel noticed the change immediately. The joy that had once lit Elena's eyes when she held her son was now shadowed by fear. She was quieter, distant, constantly looking over her shoulder. "You're not alone," he reminded her one night as he rocked the baby gently in his arms. "Whatever he's planning, we'll fight it together." But deep down, Elena knew this was a battle unlike any before. This wasn't about words or apologies or even shared custody anymore. This was about control. Over her, over the child, over their future. And Adrian had already made his first move. The following week, a letter arrived. It was from Adrian's lawyers again, but this time, the tone was different. Colder, more aggressive. They claimed that as the biological father listed on the birth certificate, Adrian had the right to full custody if he could prove that Elena's living situation was not in the child's best interest. It was a tactic meant to scare her, and it worked. For the first time, Elena questioned everything. Was Daniel's small apartment enough? Could they provide the stability Adrian's money could? Was she risking her son's future by fighting too hard for control? But Daniel refused to let her fall into despair. He began meeting with his own legal team, gathering evidence, building a case that showed Elena was a loving, capable mother and that the baby's life with them was safe and nurturing. It was a desperate race against time because Adrian wasn't waiting. He was already filing for emergency custody. The court hearing was set just 3 weeks after the baby's birth. Those 3 weeks felt like a lifetime. Adrian sent expensive gifts and invitations for family dinners, hoping to soften her stance. When she refused, he showed up unannounced, standing at her door with tears in his eyes and promises on his lips. "I want to raise my son," he said. "I want him to know both his parents. Don't shut me out." But Elena's trust was gone, replaced by a mother's instinct to protect. "You lost the right to make demands the night you threw us away," she told him. "You don't get to rewrite history because it's convenient now." Still, a part of her ached when she saw the way he looked at the baby, not as a trophy or an obligation, but with real, raw love. And that made everything more dangerous, because love, even when genuine, could be weaponized. The day of the emergency hearing arrived. The courtroom was packed. Adrian's lawyers painted Elena as unstable and manipulated, claiming Daniel's involvement created confusion around the baby's parental structure. They argued that a stable, 2-parent household, with Adrian and Elena co-parenting, was in the child's best interest. Then Daniel's legal team struck back with evidence of Adrian's abandonment, the psychological trauma he caused, and the sudden appearance of his name on the birth certificate without legal consent. Witnesses testified to Elena's care and dedication, including doctors and social workers who had seen her journey firsthand. But then came a twist no one saw coming. Adrian's side produced a document, a notarized statement from a hospital administrator, claiming Elena had verbally consented to adding Adrian's name to the birth certificate during labor. It was a lie, but proving it false would be nearly impossible. The judge didn't make a decision that day. Instead, he scheduled a full custody trial and granted Adrian temporary visitation twice a week. It was a blow that left Elena shaking as she walked out of the courthouse, Daniel's arm around her shoulders. "This isn't over," he whispered. "We're going to fight this, every step of the way." But the cracks were already forming. Adrian's visits brought cameras and reporters, and every photo of him holding his son fueled public sympathy. People began to question Elena's choices, to wonder if she was being selfish. Sponsors offered Adrian lucrative deals, framing him as a devoted single father fighting to be in his child's life. And behind the scenes, whispers spread that he was preparing to petition for full custody on the grounds of emotional manipulation by Daniel. One evening, exhausted and overwhelmed, Elena stood by the crib watching her son sleep. "What if he wins?" she whispered. "What if I lose him?" Daniel stepped behind her, his voice steady, even though his eyes betrayed the same fear. "Then we fight harder. Because love isn't about who has the most money or the best lawyers. It's about who's willing to give everything. And I'm not giving up on either of you." Outside, rain began to fall again, tapping against the glass like a heartbeat. Elena knew the storm was far from over. In fact, it was just reaching its peak. And in the coming weeks, it wouldn't just be her future on the line. It would be her child's entire life. The courtroom was silent, the kind of silence that hummed with tension so thick it pressed against the skin. Elena sat on the witness stand, her hands trembling in her lap, her heart pounding as if it knew that every word she spoke today could decide her child's future. Across the room, Adrian sat with his team of lawyers, calm and composed, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a storm he was trying desperately to hide. Daniel sat behind her, his gaze steady, his silent strength anchoring her to the ground. This was the final custody hearing, the last battle in a war that had consumed all of them, and it would end today. The proceedings began with brutal precision. Adrian's legal team opened with a carefully crafted narrative, a story of a father who had made mistakes but had spent every day since trying to atone. They spoke of his wealth, his stability, his ability to provide opportunities beyond imagination. They painted Elena as emotional, unpredictable, and influenced by a man with no biological connection to the child. Then they called Adrian to the stand. He spoke with rehearsed sincerity, his voice breaking at all the right moments. "I failed once," he told the court. "I let fear and pride blind me. But I love my son. I want to teach him, protect him, guide him. I want him to know that his father never stopped loving him, even when he was too broken to show it." The courtroom was moved. Even the judge's expression softened. But Elena knew the truth behind the words. She had lived the abandonment, felt the weight of every tear cried alone. And when it was her turn to testify, she rose with a strength she didn't know she still had. "I don't doubt that Adrian loves our child," she began, her voice shaking but clear. "But love is more than words. It's more than wealth. Love is showing up. Love is choosing someone when it's hardest, not when it's convenient. Love is staying when the storm hits, and Adrian didn't stay." Her lawyer guided her gently through questions about the night she was thrown into the rain, the weeks of silence, the threats, the manipulation. The courtroom listened in silence as she recounted every painful detail. And when she spoke of Daniel, of the man who had found her broken on the street and built her back up piece by piece, her voice softened but grew stronger. "This child already has a father," she said. "The man who read him story, as before he was even born. The man who held him through sleepless nights. The man who never once asked for proof before he loved him." The words hung heavy in the air. Adrian shifted in his seat, his jaw tight, but there was no arrogance in his eyes now, only pain. Then came the twist no one saw coming. Elena's lawyer introduced new evidence, internal hospital communications obtained through a subpoena. They showed that Adrian's team had pressured hospital staff into adding his name to the birth certificate while Elena was unconscious after giving birth. It was a calculated move to strengthen his custody claim. The revelation sent a ripple of shock through the courtroom. Adrian's lawyers scrambled to contain the damage, but the judge's expression hardened. The trial spiraled into chaos. Adrian was forced back onto the stand, his calm facade cracking under cross-examination. "Did you or did you not instruct your representatives to alter the birth record without the mother's consent?" the lawyer demanded. Adrian hesitated. "I just wanted to make sure I was part of my son's life." "You mean you wanted control?" the lawyer pressed. The judge called for order, his tone sharper now. The evidence had changed everything. What was once a battle about who could provide the better home was now a question of trust, and Adrian's credibility was crumbling fast. But the most powerful moment came when the judge requested to speak directly to both parties. "This case isn't about your pride," he said, his gaze moving between them. "It's about a child. And what a child needs more than anything is stability, love, and a safe environment. I will not reward manipulation, and I will not punish genuine care." The final arguments were made, and then there was nothing left but to wait. The courtroom held its breath as the judge read his ruling. Primary custody will remain with the mother. The court recognizes Daniel Cole as the child's legal guardian and father figure based on his ongoing role in the child's life. Visitation rights will be granted to Mr. Blake under strict supervision, subject to review. The room erupted, reporters whispering, lawyers scrambling, Adrian burying his face in his hands. Elena felt her knees weaken, tears flooding her eyes as Daniel wrapped his arms around her. It was over. They had won. But as they walked out of the courtroom, a strange silence lingered in Adrian's seat. He did not rage. He did not shout. He simply sat there staring at the floor, broken in a way that wealth and power could not fix. And as Elena carried her son into the sunlight, she knew this chapter of their lives was closing. But the story was far from finished. Because love and blood had collided, and though the law had chosen one, the heart was not so easily divided. And somewhere deep inside her, a question still echoed. Could a man who had destroyed so much ever truly be forgiven? A year passed, yet the echoes of that courtroom battle still lingered in every corner of Elena's world. Life had slowly found a rhythm again, a fragile peace that wrapped itself around their small family. Daniel had legally adopted the baby, now named Noah, and their home was filled with the laughter and chaos of early parenthood. There were sleepless nights and joyful mornings, first steps and first words, and through it all, Daniel never wavered. He was father, protector, and partner in every sense. But the ghost of Adrian Blake was never far. He appeared twice a month for supervised visits, each one conducted under watchful eyes. At first, they were awkward and silent. Adrian would sit on the floor and watch Noah play, too afraid to reach out, too unsure if he was welcome in the world he had once rejected. But as months passed, something began to change. His visits grew longer, his voice gentler. Noah, unaware of the storm that had shaped his early life, began to reach for him, tiny hot, and is grabbing Adrian's finger, curious eyes studying his face. It was in those small moments that Adrian found a new purpose. He sold off portions of his empire, stepped away from boardrooms, and dedicated himself to something that no amount of wealth could buy: being present. Yet no matter how hard he tried, there was a distance he couldn't cross, a wall that his past had built brick by brick. And that wall was Elena. She had forgiven many things in her life, but betrayal of that magnitude had carved wounds too deep to heal easily. Even when she saw the way Noah giggled in Adrian's arms, or how the man who once cared only for power now spent hours building Lego towers, her heart remained cautious. It wasn't hate anymore, just fear. Fear that letting him close again might break everything she had rebuilt. One spring afternoon, a letter arrived. It was handwritten, sealed with no lawyer's stamp or corporate insignia. Adrian requested to meet, not as a rival or a claimant, but as a man who wanted closure. Against Daniel's protective instincts, Elena agreed. They met at the park where she often took Noah for walks. Adrian was already there, dressed simply, a bouquet of small white flowers in his hands. "Thank you for coming," he said quietly. "I wasn't sure you would." Elena stood a few feet away, Noah asleep in his stroller. "What do you want, Adrian?" "To apologize," he said. "Not in court, not in front of lawyers. Just here, where it's real. I destroyed something beautiful because I was too afraid to believe it could be mine. And I'll live with that every day." There was no rehearsed speech this time, no grand gesture, just raw honesty. "I know I can't be his father the way Daniel is," he continued. "I lost that right long ago, but I still want to be someone he can look up to, someone he's proud to know." Elena looked at him for a long time. "I don't know if I can ever forget," she said. "But maybe forgiveness isn't about forgetting. Maybe it's about choosing to let the past stop controlling the future." The wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a silence that felt like an ending and a beginning. Weeks turned into months, and a new chapter slowly unfolded. Adrian became Noah's godfather, a role that allowed him to be part of the boy's life without threatening the family that had formed around him. He was there for birthdays and school recitals, sometimes standing in the background, sometimes reading bedtime stories when Daniel and Elena were exhausted. And over time, the bitterness that had once poisoned every interaction began to fade. One summer evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they all gathered in the backyard for Noah's second birthday. Children laughed, candles flickered, and Daniel grilled while Elena chased their son around the grass. Adrian watched from a distance, a faint smile tugging at his lips. When Noah toddled over and tugged at his pant leg, Adrian knelt, lifting the boy into his arms. "Happy birthday, little man," he whispered. Noah giggled and wrapped his arms around Adrian's neck. In that moment, all the broken pieces of their past seemed to fall into place. Not perfectly, but enough. Enough for healing. Enough for love. Later that night, after the guests had gone and Noah was asleep, Elena and Daniel sat together on the porch, watching the stars. "Do you ever regret any of it?" Daniel asked quietly. Elena shook her head. "No. Every mistake, every heartbreak, every choice led us here. And here is where we were always meant to be." He slipped his hand into hers. "I was terrified I'd lose you to him." "You could never lose me," she whispered. "Because love isn't about who was there first. It's about who never walks away." Inside, Noah stirred in his crib, safe and loved by two men who had once been enemies but were now bound by something greater than their past, a shared devotion to the little life that had changed them both. And as the night deepened around them, Elena felt something she hadn't felt since that stormy night when everything fell apart. She felt peace. Not the fragile kind that hides from pain, but the deep, unshakable peace that comes when forgiveness and love finally win. The man who once shouted that the baby wasn't his had been right in one way. Fatherhood was never about biology. It was about sacrifice, about showing up, about choosing love every single day. And in the end, that love, messy, complicated, and real, was what brought them all home.